I'm gonna get flagged for that. That guy sounds a whole lot like it. His name is Truth Surge, and he's got his own channel, and he does dubs of things like that, just his own version, and plays a lot of guitar parts of stuff, old Randy Rhoads and all kinds of things. Real nice, and older dude my age and stuff. He's been around for a long time and got some good equipment. Sounds great. But that song always gets me going, kind of like Kashmir gets me in the Egypt, maybe Sumerian mood. That one gets me more up into the Proto-Indo-European and early European mood. And we're about to look into the Picts, Gauls, Scots, and exploring their mysterious and sometimes mythical origins. When the tribe of the Kelti, like Hatti, arrived in Scotland at the beginning of the Christian era and began an embryonic clan, Keith, who I have a connection with in the family, they assimilated with the people known to us by their Roman name, the Picts. They, however, knew themselves by another name, the Kelti or the Kelti, and you'll see it listed as Keltoi also. We're aware of this fact from the written work of the Roman scribes, who quite naturally filled in the details of the unknown that they were expected to. And they usually filled it in with things like, oh, well, do they speak Greek? Well, then they're idiots and they're barbarians. Do they shave themselves all the? No, then they're barbarians, right? Things along that range. And we realize now that barbarian really referred to people who wouldn't shave themselves constantly, of course, because they were at the time somewhat of a hoity-toity about that type of thing. But their own philosophers seem to keep that same look, though. Where the Picts came from and who they were, other than carvers of often monumental monoliths, and the speakers and readers and writers of a script we're all still yet to decipher, understand, and know, remains mysterious to the masses. This is a strange depiction to some, and it appears to be what this is a Celtic warrior, and riding on a horse. You can tell that pretty easily, but he's shave-headed, but has his beard, and he looks like he's blowing a trumpet, or a lot of people say drinking from a horn that the end of it has been made to look like either a goose or maybe even a buzzard or whatever. So pretty cool little carving here back in the old days. And so what people think of Picts and what they've said about them a lot of times and things, if you look at the people that are saying that, quite often they said that about everyone around them, and you have to take some of that with a grain of salt. Descendants of a goddess, though, that's a little different. They themselves believed that they were descendants of the goddess Bridget, and I'm about to do a whole one about Bridget and her husband and the people that go along with each other. I might do them singles, it'd be small. Considered to be sacred and benevolent across the desperate communities of the Celtic world, Kenneth MacAlpine, considered to be Scotland's first king, was a descendant through his mother, as all Pictish kings were, as a consequence of their material system of inheritance. Kind of like in the Bible, it goes with the mother a little bit differently. Isn't that strange? Not really. To the Gaelic speakers who had arrived in Ireland, the Picts of what they called Alba or Scotland were known as the Cruithne, which translates into English as wheat growers, basically farmers, and that name too was to be found in the use in Ireland at that time to describe the non-Gaels. Their land was known as Cruithne Tuatha, and it has to do with Tuatha Dannan. The Cruithne had populated Ireland before the arrival of Hibernia, of the Gaels from Iberia, or Hiberud. What you're seeing here is a depiction that they've colored in, which was originally black and white, of a tattooed up and painted Scythian warrior goddess, and you notice that she's got a trident. Oh, it's not that big and everything, but it doesn't have to be. All it's got to do is fork in. That's all it really has to do. But you can see there's castles and things too, so that's a little bit questionable as to what you're supposed to think of things. And whenever somebody said they were painted all over their body, that they always show their body. Quite often there's some people that get quite tattooed, but they don't run around naked. So that was from 1588. Accounts in the book of Lagoon and told by Strabo. In the Irish Chronicle, the book of Lagoon, it is written that Noah came from Japheth, and then father after son, Fathacht, Mace, Boin, Angoin, Partolain, Lutige, Singe or Kinge, and Cruthne, who himself produced the 7 sons, Kate, Kay, Kerrig, Fib, Figdach, Folta, Fortum, and each of them were kings of the 7 provinces or kingdoms of Cruth-Natuath. Now that's all symbolic too somewhat, and they automatically have 7 kings and everything. It's kind of like in the Bible, and they have 12 kids, and it goes with these things and symbologies. We've talked about the 5 and the 7 before, and things that go along with these ideas and these triple gods and goddesses. For when we talk about Bridget, we'll understand where Britain comes from, and that they had their own version of the same thing. But Noah came from Japheth, and they didn't have any J back then, so it's Japheth. And through that line also is the prophet Ishmael, and so on. It leads through that too, and it talks about it in there. But let's the Greek historian Strabo, writing on the 1st century AD, asserted that the Picts, or the Celts, had been displaced to Scotland from the Celtic lands of Gaul, which he called Galatia, which is like where Galatians comes from, by the way. So it's interesting that they're right there in the Bible, as opposed to way over there and not involved at all by the thoughts of some people. But called the Galati by the Samaritans. Remember the Good Samaritan? We were talking about the Samaritans things, whose soldiers had invaded from beyond the river Rhine and from the mountains that are now part of Switzerland. In fact, he tells the reader that they had arrived in Kelti, or Galatia, from Asia Minor, where they had been known as the Chaldees, or Gilat from Galatia, as in of the Chaldees. You paying attention? Still got everybody? The area that was formerly the lands upon which the Hittites had built their capital of Hattusa. This is the other people that had the cuneiform writing and things and showed up. They had metallurgy and things, chariots and the first ones of them, and then they disappear about the time of that Trojan War and things happening and stuff. And where'd they go? Well, I'm trying to tell you what everybody says. But these Chaldeans, or Hattusa, are the same people as the Chaldeans who migrated from the neighborhood of Sumer towards north to Anatolia. The ancient Sumerians, when their problem had happened, they migrated north, and then shortly later show up the kingdom of Hatti, and then take off and go here. Is that the same one? Well, let's see if we recognize anything. I'm not going to go through the Hattian art, for this isn't about Hatti, but that looks familiar styling somewhat, right? Old Spanish castles and castles of yore, a facade around the top so you can shoot arrows even if somebody's shooting at you, and it's kind of, later we do little slits in and out, in and out. This is intricate, isn't it? Yeah, and this is from way back when. I mean, really way back when. I think this dates like 1100 BC. Kind of a flip-flop on a BC-AD situation there on that look. Well, let's continue. Holy ancestors. The Gauls themselves recorded their descent through the time in the Lebor Gabala, And that's weird. It's almost like if you took that to Latin or things, you would say it's the labor of the big or god Baal, but his labor. But he's not a woman. Well, the story in it isn't about a woman either. So here's a flip flop again. But it's written in the 11th century A.D. and it claimed that their ancestor was a Scythian king. His name is Phineas Farsade, also a descendant of Japheth, and one of the 72 chiefs who began the construction of the ill-fated Tower of Babel. Take that, Phineas and Ferb. His son, known as Nel, wed the Egyptian princess Scotia, and from that union came the son, Gaelglas, from whom came the Gaelic culture and language, one of the original 72 tongues that emerged following the curse on the 72 chieftains that were intent on building a tower to talk to God, supposedly. But you've maybe seen my video where I tell you about the Tower of Babel, and that's not really how that all worked out, and it wasn't even intended to be in the first place. But it showed a pinpoint in time of things that happened. There was a time that Sumerian language of the cuneiform was really lost there, about a 700, 800 year period, and then came back in, and cuneiform really became lost. The Hattusians took off. The Egyptians still had remnants of it, but it was some archaic language and thing that we had lost. Also, the only how we figured out hieroglyphics is the Rosetta Stone, and that led us into it because some of these ancient scholars, the Greeks and stuff, tabulated it down in each language. It's the only way it was able to work. So, and also, I'd like to mention that 72 is going to be real important when we start talking about sacred geometry and things like that. So it's showing you that that had that connected into it. Still got you here? Nel and Scotia spent their time in Egypt before they left for Spain, leaving at the same time that the Hebrews departed. Wherever they left to, they brought with them the accumulated knowledge of that civilization. And wherever Mary went, the land was sure to go. And here's Mariotten. Many people think that was Scotia. Scotia was the wife of Nel, who begot Goidelglas, who's not here yet in the picture, and that started out that point. Knowing all the red and blonde-haired mummies that we found and everything, it gives more credence. When people looked at this 20, 30 years ago, and they were really not in knowledge about the mummies and things, they looked at it as being, what? And that's about all you got out of it. The Hebrew Bible, or Old Testament, is, of course, where we first read about the Tower of Babel and Japheth, as well as his second-born son, Magog. Some people know of Agog and Magog, and they were giants and said to be taller than other people. Hell, one of them had a bed that was 13 foot long or whatever. From the Romano-Jewish historian of the 1st century A.D., Titus Flavius Josephus, born Yusef ben Mattatyahu, we learn that the Scythians are descended from Magog. Now, could it be that the firstborn son of Japheth came the Picts, and from the second-born came the Gaels, like it tried to say? Well, this is where this 12 tribes situation comes in and where it vibrates to, guys. But also notice that he's saying that the Romano-Jewish historian Titus Flavius Josephus, and that's where it went to, and he was the second coming, is Titus Flavius. Josephus even says so. I've done videos about this. Look up Flavian signature and it'll tell you at least where that part of it connects. I've got other things that connect all to it. I'm sure he does too. But born Yusef ben Mattatyahu, and what's weird is that it's when they say that that's Joseph bar Matthias, and Joseph of Arimathea is the one that got the body of Christ and did the thing. There is no place called Arimathea. But that's the name of the guy, Joseph de Flavius, who talks about them having 3 people on the cross, and he recognized them and had them taken down, and one of them died, the second one died, and the third one miraculously lived. If you want something that'll give you an input to where within a couple of 100 years that's all put together, within a short time after, really, but then finalized later, Council of Nicaea and stuff, then there you go. So Scythians are part of Magog. But the biblical tribe of Dan has been often connected with the story of Ireland, particularly with one of founding people of that land, the Tuatha Dannan, there's Dan, which can translate as tribe of Dan itself. And here's a picture of the Tuatha Dannan. And I don't know where to put this in here. I was going to try to show a video clip and clip it and do all those things, but have you seen Willow, the movie? It's an old, Dungeons and Dragons tale and everything that's kind of tongue-in-cheek a little bit, kind of that half hokey, half serious thing going on. And it's got a dwarf, which would be Willow, and then the Mad Mardigan, the big player guy, is Val Kilmer, and he's got this girl that he runs into, and she's Scotia. If you take the R out of that, which they put an R in a few people's names in that, that's Scotia. She's a redhead too, vibrant redhead, and she falls for him whenever he falls for her after having taken some magic from these brownies that are mischievous and get into him, and it makes him fall in love like a love potion. And this all goes with everything real weirdly. But then you look at the backstory of the idea and who they have, and maybe you can notice some gleaming points out of that, but that was made by Ron Howard. So, Opie and Happy Days and that guy there, yeah, this is part of his thing, and he wanted to do something. It was for his kids and all that stuff, so he made this. But whenever you see Willow and he's trying to bring back the old lady, her name is Finn Rizal, and she's a witch, but she's been turned into a creature and put on an island, and so he has to get her back, and he takes this stick, which is a witch's wand, and it's known as Sherlindria's wand. So it's a relic, okay? And so what happens is he comes there and he tries to do this chant, and he doesn't work the first time, and then he does it again. He's trying to do it, and then she changes into a goat, into a lion, and then pow, all of a sudden there she is, but a naked woman, and they wrap her up real quick, and he hands her the stick, and she goes after Rizal, the evil lady, Bavmorda, if you remember. So then Rizal, what's weird is she tells him this chant, and you don't get to see them. They supposedly cut that, the missing pieces of the movie, where she's trying to teach him the chant. And the first time she does it, if you remember, it hurts his hand. And she goes, that's common when it's new. And he tried to do this disappearing pig trick, and it does it too in the thing with the baby, right? And that baby right there, believe it or not, ends up being Dallas Bryce Howard, who was in the vampire kissing movies and in the Jurassic Park thing and everything else. Sure enough, that's how old a movie I'm talking about. But you need to check it out if you see it. But what am I trying to get at is whenever he sat there chanting with that stick, going around and around, and it got her to change and everything and doing it, if you listen closely, what he's chanting out is things like Tuatha, Tuatha, Dannan and a Dannan. And he keeps calling out these things and running around like it's a spell. And she goes, remember the charm of making. And then it works. And that's all connected to this also. And when I was about the age that was out and real popular, I was finding out about this and going through it. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh my God. The first time I saw that, I was like, oh, I literally stood up, startled, and just like, is he really, straightforward, just straight out there like that. And I look over here, and there's my album covers with Journey and everything on, and sticks and stuff, and I'm like, oh my God. It's just in my face, and it just kept happening over and over again. But that's another story. But if you've seen that movie, liked it, say something down in the comments, because it's a good movie. It really is. And I like Val Kilmer. He hasn't done a lot in a long time, but he's supposed to be making an appearance in the new Top Gun thing that they're redoing on it. So You know, everything's a redo now. Nobody can come up with anything new that's worth listening about. So the Danite Hebrews that we were talking about, who occupied, it tells you in the Bible, a coastal territory in ancient Israel, were mariners and merchants. Now this is going to tell you that that's the Phoenicians, but they were also of the lands of Crete and in Greece, or Mycenae and stuff, from where they left at the time of the famine and the schism within the house of David that saw the 10 northern tribes seceding over the ascension to the throne of Solomon's son Rehoboam before a reconciliation and the reunification of the kingdoms of Judah and Israel. These were concurrent events, by the way, and he was supposed to have gone. Rehoboam went into Egypt and waited and then come back in, and then all these people were gone. And if you'll read the Bible stories, they tell you a thing about there. They compared somebody to Satan there, and they said, oh, you have fallen, you know, you were great and all this, oh, you fall Satan and everything about that. And it's one of the only times they try to point out somebody, but they're pointing out how that, bam, that just happened and stuff, right? But there's more to it than that, for that's the downfall of another people at the same time that we've talked about in this area quite a bit. I'm just going to go on, though, and keep making connections. According to history, from the Greek islands, they arrived in Denmark, giving that place its name. Interestingly, the peopling of the rest of Scandinavia began at Denmark. For obvious geographic reasons, therefore, it would have been possible for the Tuatha Dannan to have arrived in Ireland via the north, as the Irish chronicles inform us they do, and through the Danube, that they were already well familiar of going back and forth, as the Bible tells, where they collect tin and they go to ancient Spain and all these places. So they're well aware of this thing. Well, if you read the Bible, ain't nobody there going on any boat or nothing. No, this was the tribe of Dan. It's not the people that are talked about that were goat herders and the last ones to come to it. These are totally, see, it's a different thing than you think, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, all you got to do is point this out, and it's like, well, why don't they say it like that? No. You got to have this idea that you're the goat herder. You were the last in line, and so you have to humble yourself and all these things. You can't be the dudes that already had it going on, and these Canaanites, that's bad. You're not supposed to read and writing and lipstick and all those things. Oh, that's bad. The bad angels taught you that. You see? Like nobody beat a drum and danced around ever before that. All of a sudden, that just come out of nowhere, right? Anyhow, so that would be possible for them in the Tuatha Dannan, and it makes more sense now too. But Scotland too is to the north of Ireland. How about that? According to the ancient myths of Ireland, recorded at different times in different languages and by different peoples, upon the arrival of the Gaels, or Gaels, on the island, Ireland was inhabited by a people who were known to history as the Tuatha Dannan. According to legend, the first Gael ashore was met by 3 high kings of the Tuatha Dannan, which are Macquill, Mackecht, and Macgreen. And I believe somebody told me that 3 has to do with something where it was like colors or something, and all 3 were symbolic too, right? So this is like the 3 kings met him, you know, and stuff like in the Bible idea, almost that same idea. We 3 kings of not Orient, Occident, are bearing gifts. We travel so far. Yeah, we're getting there. Okay. So this is Oisin Nima traveling through Tira Nog, or the land of the young, and an other world inhabited by an Irish fairy people, the Tuatha Dannan. Why is it such a young land and everything? Well, it's become fresh and new after the last ice age. The story continues that a deal was struck, and the Gaels agreed that they would wait on board their ships anchored offshore. In the meantime, one of the queens conjured up a tempest and a storm, and with the intention of scattering the invading fleet. However, it abated with the magical words of a Gaelic poet, And so this guy magically was able to calm the storms. Oh, it gets worse. In the ending of surviving Gaels and Milesians, as they were known to the Tuatha Dannan, so they knew the ratings of miles. Have you ever played the card Milleborns? No, and it's a card game. So they tell you that they were known as the Tuatha Dannan, and the chroniclers of the time landed and agreed that Ireland should be split between them, and the Gauls taking the ground of the island of the Tuatha Dannan, inheriting the underground where they would continue to live as the fairy people of fable. Now, people have said, oh, okay, so they went underground and they're like this and stuff. No, there's other ways of looking at the people went underground. You can say that they went to Hades, or they went to hell, or things like that. Those things happened due to maybe diseases coming and things whenever they showed up with the first of them, but also you can look at it as being that they lived below them, as above so below, but they could live below them. It's where I take the high road and you take the low road, and I'll be in Scotland before ye. But these they were to continue on living as the fairy folk of people of fable. What really it seems like here, that what they do is they have absorbed themselves into them and made a mythology about them having come in, and now that they are absorbed into it, both and all, they're looking back at that and they've made a mythology about themselves. Some of them even bad. Oh, they were giants, and they're like, yeah, look at them, they were giants. No, you were the giants. What? You were the giants. You were taller than them. Well, we're all about the same size now. Well, now we are, and all these things, but one had been diminutized a little bit, apparently from this trouble and struggle of coming over, and they were a little over 5 foot. I mean, these old castles are like 5'5" doorways and stuff, and these other people were over 6 foot, and that's the giants. So no, they weren't 16 foot, and so we got, now that we got 6-footer guys standing in front of us, we're gonna make it up and say that they were like woo, like in the Bible, and say that he was a giant that was real big. Of course, you look now and really figure it out in the Septuagint, he was 6'9", and I'll be damned, that's pretty giant, especially if I'm 5'5" at most. So there are the wee people. There are people that are extremely fair, like the picture that we were looking at, and there's a reason they call them fairies. And there's a people that are the farmers that were working there, and their skin is much more brown and not kept as fair, and all these things, and they're the brownies type of thing, and it just all kinds of fits together. But who were they? Well, they were just waves of the same people coming in and running into the people that had still left there on Spain and other places below the continental ice shelf that you could live on before the last ice age. And as it went away, wham, there you go. And there's Doggerland, and people are all there, and then all of a sudden it floods over and they have to leave the area. It's another flood story. So that's the coming of the sons of Milid. And if you look at it, those are Phoenician boats. What are you doing there? What that? The Danann, pre-Celtic fairy people, were overthrown by the invading Milesians. Tuatha Dannan had themselves invading Ireland, relieving those they knew as the Firbolg, which had to do with giants too, of the people that were already there. It's another little Viking kind of Norse deal. Of their command, scholars assert that the Firbolg were the Celts displaced from the area of today's Belgium, which was being incorporated into the Romanicized world. Oh, is that where that romanticized comes from? Romanicized, Roman? Well, man, them Greeks and then them Romans, huh? They put all these names on things and Got people all confused, and they wanted to. Damn well, didn't they? That would confuse things, as the dates for the Roman advance on Belgae are far too late to fit the actuality happening. But what does is the leaving, whenever the Mycenaeans and the big explosion, which some people say was the Atlantis thing that really happened anyhow. Instead of 9,000 years, it was 900 years, and that'll peg it to be right there in the Isle of Santorini and the circle of that. But peg it more around that time or so. So who were the Romans at that time? Well, they're not really the Romans yet that we know of them as, but they're the Romans there. But then there's this people that a lot of people call the Cyclops, which we'll have to get into separately. The Cyclopean building, and we look at it, and it come out of that as these Etruscan people, which apparently are connected to them anyhow in the first place. What word? So is it too late to fit, or are they? Legend asserts that the Firbolg were the descendants of 5,000 people who had originated in Greece and arrived in Ireland from there after the first traversing continental Europe as far as the English Channel. Can you smell that? I can smell it. It smells like clover. Lavender. Were the Tuatha Dannan and the Cruithne one of the same people? By becoming fairies residing in the underworld or spiritual world, they became eternal. Their symbols, their names, their histories, and legends would become part of high culture of the Gaels in Ireland, and remain so, as indeed happened across the water in Scotland, where the spiritual heritage of the Picts, or the Cruithne, was the glue that held together the new society forged by their merging with the Scots of Dalriada to create a Gaelic Scotland. And we still talk about fairies and the magical world that came about when the world went through a big change when all these people came. And it's been put down in mythology. And if you really read into it, it's not that much weirder than the Greeks and all their weird. Get a drink. The name Eire, or Air, as in Aryans, the Gaelic form of Ireland, comes from Eru, one of triumvirate, or goddess of the Tuatha Dannan, and the wife of King Makek. Her sisters, Banba and Fatla, have given their names informally and poetically to their land. Fatla was also a son of Cruithne. Could he instead have been a daughter, perhaps more appropriate in a matrilineal succession, sons and daughters sharing the kingdom? Did they change that a little over time to make it go yin-yang? So later they could say this person came from this person and these, so they didn't have to involve somebody that wasn't of their lineage that you'd have to explain. That's what it looks like to a lot of scholars at that point. But so here's a look at her, and she has this angel made into a harp, playing a song on the side of the shore of the sea, much like Persephone, the harp of Arion, and that name Arion. Now let's say something for a minute. Arion, and we know that's Arion and Aaron, it goes together. But if I say that Moses' brother, who took over the church, and the very start of them meeting at Mount Sinai, and after that, and took people into the promised land, wasn't his name Aaron? Ding! You know what I need? I need one of those little bells like you have at a bellhop, and every time I hit something I think's important, ha ding, I can hit that, because we're about 7 dings in right now, aren't we? The result of 7 years of famine, it is not reasonable to suggest that the mass displacement of populations that occurred around the globe, but specifically for this peace in North America, the Levant, and Anatolia, and the Black Sea area during the 7 years of famine between 1703 and 1696 was the primary driving force for the settlement of Scotland, Ireland, and much of the northwestern Europe, for that matter. This catastrophic calamity was recorded from China to the Americas in literature, and in the rings of trees, forced starving Aryans from their desiccated grasslands and over the Hindu Kush towards the civilization of the Indus Valley. It drove the Scythians westward too, into Europe, and thus creating the Celtic nations of Europe that over time themselves spread westward until being isolated there millennia later. And here's a map of things, the great famine of Joseph, as we note about it, and they recorded in, and they're showing who went where. They jumped out of here, and they talk about Hatti being part of the Israel thing, the Celts and the Kelti being here in Assyria, but the Kelti tribes and the Magogites here just above the Caucasus Mountains, Anatolia, Troy's right here, right? Tribe of Dan, Phoenicians, and they take off Carthage and all these guys, and they cruise out of here, and where the hell they end up? Well, some bounced off Spain, or this portion here was known as Amorica. Oh, damn, that sounds familiar. Let's see, if I took that O and made it an E for Amer, which is friend, and changed it just that much, that would be, yeah, America. So, quite telling. Here we got the Tuatha Dannan, the Celt, the Magogites are here, not up over here anymore. Why are they not up over here? They're supposed to be over here, Gog and Magog. And if you look at the Bible thing, they'll show you where a lot of them were supposed to be. Well, that was at one time. For now, on the way over here, over here. And if you'll, in the other video that I've got coming out, it's a two-parter, it shows you a lot of other people that came down through and who ended up becoming the Germans. There's the Huns that we hear of, and I know you've heard of Attila and everything. It's a different thing altogether, actually. So that was migration routes through this famine that had gone on, but we see that these seafarers out of the Mediterranean had already established intercontinental trade routes. The builders of the monuments of the Middle East had already navigated the North European coastline. It doesn't stretch the imagination to see the connection between the Levantine Leviathans and the Pictish stones at Callanish, both constructed to monitor and honor the sun and its cycle. And there's a sacred wheel that I've got a video out about. It's a wheel of the giants that's right out there in Jordan. And it goes with that same idea. And here's that sacred geometry and people checking out and farming and got it all lined up with the stars. Right? It seems that the ancestral origin myths, retained and remembered by the modern Scots and Irish, are borne out. What do you think? A fusion for familiar faces. In this guy's recent article called Names from the Near East, it asserted that there were a fusion between the Hittites of Anatolia and the Picts. Were they already familiar with each other from their shared time together in the Middle East in ancient times? Recognizing each other as brothers, as to say, like the Egyptians did to the Mitanni in the Amarna letters? The crucible of modern civilization? Could it be two stakes came together in a different way? Each of the original waves of invaders of what would eventually become the British Isles launched themselves from the Mediterranean. It seems they would have moved because famine had caused the collapse of their societies, and this whole area up there was fresh and unpicked and nobody's living in it, and all these trees are gotten going and putting out fruits and doing things, and it's like Eden again. It's like going back to Eden at the Tigris and Euphrates and having things almost just magically naturally grow for you, right? It's just already set up. So it's the land of milk and honey. It's the happy hunting grounds. It's the promised land. It's many, many things. City-states were collapsing, though, at that time, so they went to greener pastures. Civilizations, too, were collapsing. Sumer, like its teacher Harappa, also collapsed at this time, perhaps forcing its most famous son, Abraham, credited with teaching science to the Egyptians, no, that's Thoth, or Tautus the Phoenician, to begin the migration that would allow him to fulfill his God-given duties to teach. And so people talk about how Abraham was from Ur, and he left, but he left also after their gods in Sumer had failed them. They had said it wasn't going to flood ever again and put a rainbow out, and I'll be damned if it didn't flood again. In fact, the Sumerian tablets tell you exactly of this fact. They released a dove and a raven, and it came back in the whole 9 yards. So here he is off with his family, and Sarah, and so on, and people have been Terah, and people have figured out, hey, this is just something real close with all these names, and there's too many Josephs, and you keep recording, and everybody keeps doing the same thing, and over again, and they go through water, and they go through Egypt, and it's either 40 days, or 40 years, or 40 nights, or whatever, and all these things are happening with these numbers, and yeah, there's a reason for that. I'll get to that in other videos. First, Abraham was to reach the wind-swept northern shores, built the structures that allowed civilization to exist. Or first to reach the wind-swept northern shores, built the structures that were allowed civilization to exist, specifically to track time, as in Stonehenge and these places. Each of the civilizations in that area at that time were polytheistic and sun worshippers and Arians, and they had emerged from the same root, one teaching the other and pushing knowledge of the material world further along the road of discovery. They brought all of their knowledge and customs with them. They also brought their spiritual inheritance, and it has never left us. And I think that's an excellent article. I can't put things that concise, and I love it whenever you have a good sentence like there. But that might show you why everybody has such a strong connection, and they know that it works off them. But if you had any question back then, you only had to wait to see what was going to happen and come out just a few hundred years later. But everything got screwed because religion went crazy, and oh my God. And then you think that was just it, but these volcanoes and things caused massive problems, and then there was plagues and all kinds of crap, and people freaked out, like people are trying to freak out now. And they freaked out, and it took us 2,000 years to come out of that crap, and we had steam engines going on and stuff that really might have taken us 400 or 500 years to get to the point. I'm not saying we would have had all of a sudden a railroad car going, but let me tell you, it wouldn't have taken another person to figure it out. And then all of a sudden, all these things that they knew in sacred geometry way back when is figured out in Copernicus and Newton and people even much, much later. It's amazing what we